Alrighty. Well, good morning to you. I'm Carl Haltman. I'm the executive director at Hokyoji, and welcome to our Sunday talk. This Sunday we have Shodo Spring as our speaker. Shodo first met the Dharma through Katagiri Roshi and later received transmission from Shohaku Okumura. Her practice focuses on our relationship with all sentient beings, and she's working on her second book. Shodo, welcome.
Thank you. So, as I was getting ready for this talk today, I realized that I have to say some things about my teacher. Last weekend, I went to Bloomington, Indiana for the stepping down ceremony for Shohaku Okumura. He is semi-retiring. He is still will be teaching a little bit. Hoko Carnegus will be abbot of the temple. And there were people there from around the world. I mean, I flew down from Minneapolis and it took me a weekend. I saw people that I have not seen in 10 years from France, Germany, Colombia. His footprint in the Dharma world is very large. People know about his scholarship, but I was immersed in the practice community that he created for a little bit. And so I wanted to say some things about him, and then the talk I'm going to give is really based on the book he wrote on Mountains and Waters Sutra, Sanswikyo. I had the privilege of editing that book some years ago, and I learned a great deal. And I also got to know him. So the things that I'm grateful for to Shohaku Okumura. His practice was completely sincere. He was not sophisticated in the ordinary way. He just did what was in front of him. He had no grasping. As his student, he would, if I asked him a question, he would usually start by saying, "I won't tell you what to do." And if I tried really hard, I might get some advice out of him. His understanding of Dogen was amazing. One year he lectured on Dogen's life for a whole year. He taught us how Dogen played with words, the Chinese words, and turned them around to penetrate the Dharma even more deeply. He always gave us the context of a text. He talked about the people who are involved in it, in this setting. And he used the Japanese words, the kanji, to explain concepts in a way that you don't get by just speaking in English. And he says some things about translations that I'll read. And there was his brilliance. There was a time when, while lecturing on something that Dogen, usually was something that Dogen wrote, he would say, "I don't know what Dogen means here." And then I would say, "I have a guess." And his guesses were always the most brilliant thing I ever heard. Finally, I told him about this and he stopped saying it. But he didn't stop being brilliant. It's like he ran away from acknowledgement. I think humility would be a good word. So here is from some things from his commentary on Mountains and Water Sutra. He started by talking about a poem by Sushi or Sudonpo, called The Verse of Keisei Sanshoku, Sound of Valley Streams, Color of Mountains. And it seems that Sushi had sat up all night next to a stream. And so Okumura Roshi gives us 5 English translations of this poem. And they each have different good things and difficulties about them. Valley sounds are the long, broad tongue. Mountain colors are no other than the unconditioned body. 84,000 verses are heard throughout the night. What can I say about this at a future time? And Sushi went to his teacher, and his enlightenment was approved, as they do in the tradition. So there's this thing about Okumura Roshi and his care with words and with understanding correctly. So he says here, when I used the Japanese English dictionary to look up the English translation of the Chinese tani, the original word for valley stream, I found almost 10 different English words. When I looked it up in a Chinese-Japanese dictionary, I also found almost 10 different Chinese characters for this one word. 20 words. Poets choose their words carefully. Why did this Chinese poet want to use this particular Chinese word? I really don't know, because I'm not him, I'm not Chinese, and I have never been to that temple where he wrote the poem. I can only try to interpret this poem through my limited knowledge, imagination, and experiences of the sounds of valley streams and colors of mountains in my life. I also remember sometime during a talk when he was asking about valley streams and what a valley stream meant. And I remember describing the Tassajara Valley stream to him. I don't know how many of you have ever been to Tassajara, but it's in a deep valley surrounded by mountains. And I had been there and I described that to him. And it seemed like the Tassajara stream was sort of the image of the kind of stream that the poet was talking about, unlike the Hokyoji stream, which winds through a meadow that's very flat. He says, uncertainty is a key element of the reality of our life. Uncertainty is a very important experience of the Buddhist teaching of emptiness. So please be patient. Don't simply believe and memorize what I'm saying. Try to really see the colors of mountains yourself. Try to hear the actual sounds of valley streams yourself as your own experience, and try to share this experience with others. So that's what I've been doing since then. I actually, after various trainings, I actually moved to a place where I live with streams and a river, not mountains, but bluffs. And I try to understand them. I try to listen to them. So how can we hear Buddha's message? How can we see Buddha? The Mahayanas, which includes us, did not agree with the earlier teaching that Shakyamuni Buddha was dead and gone. The Mahayanas said, no, we see Buddha right now. They hear voice of the Buddha, and they don't need to just read and rely on words. We're in a tradition that says you can see it for yourself. So here's a poem by Dogen. Where he's writing about the way the sounds of valley streams and the colors of mountains teach the Dharma, express the Dharma, constantly speak the Dharma. In the valley, vibrating sounds. On the peak, monkeys' intermittent chattering. I hear them as they are exquisitely expounding the sutra. Grasping the heart of this sutra, even the voices of selling and buying in the world are expounding the Dharma. Colors of the mountain peak and echoes of the valley stream, all of them as they are nothing other than my Shakyamuni's voice and appearance. Nothing other than Shakyamuni's voice and form. I think about 30 years ago, I first saw that poem on a poster in Scott Edelstein's office. And it moved in me. It just woke something in me that is still a key part of my own practice. So the term Mountains and Waters Sutra does not mean a sutra about mountains and waters. It means that mountains and waters are sutra. Mountains and waters, sutra means thread or a string. And it's like thought of as tying things together. And so the teachings, the sutras, we have like beads on a string, and each one offers a piece. And the mountains and waters, actually everything, every physical thing in the world, and every sound, all of it is teaching us. It never stops proclaiming the wheel of the Dharma. And another thing I want to read from Dogen's Valley Streams, which obviously is a relative of the Mountains and Waters teaching. He says, when you have true practice, then valley sounds and colors, mountain colors and sounds, all reveal the 84,000 verses. When you are free from fame, profit, body, and mind, the valleys and mountains are also free. Through the night, the valley sounds and mountain colors do and do not actualize the 84,000 verses. When your capacity to talk about valleys and mountains as valleys and mountains is not yet mature, who can see and hear you as valley sounds and mountain colors? Actualize. The English word means to make real. Manifest is another similar word. And it's like, oh, all the teachings of the Buddha come to reality in this physical world around us. Dogen included the marketplace in his poem. So, context. When Dogen was writing, when he wrote this poem, he lived in a culture in which there were spiritual traditions that worshiped the mountains as deities. There was a practice called Shugendo, in which monks would go on pilgrimage through mountains. Shugendo means practice, supernatural powers attained by various practices in the mountains. And Do means the way. And so these were, this was Tantric Buddhism of a different sort than we know from Tibet. But it combines Shinto with esoteric Buddhism. And they do a lot of ascetic practices in the mountains to purify their bodies and minds. Mountain pilgrimage, 1,000 days of walking within Mount Hiei, is still practiced today. So this isn't what Dogen's writing about, but it was there. It's like the people that he was speaking to knew that mountains were sacred places. But he doesn't say anything about worshiping the mountain or about gaining supernatural powers. He's quite uninterested in supernatural powers. He's more interested in being able to walk on the earth and being able to meet each other face to face. And so he says things like mountains are walking. He talks about the mountains and waters themselves. So there's a term, Dharmakaya. It's one of the bodies of Buddha. And the Buddha discussed this when people knew he was getting ready to die. He started talking about things like this. The reality of this entire world is itself Dharma, and it is itself Buddha. So they named it Dharmakaya, the way each and everything is. And when we awaken to this reality, we meet the Buddha. So Buddha's writing about mountains and waters as sutra is about this practice of meeting the Buddha through physical reality. And when we say meeting the Buddha, what is that? Buddha is awake. So physical reality is meeting physical reality is a way of being awake. So this is a little more about how Okumura Roshi talked about Dogen and his teaching. And he gives an example. It's in Busho, Buddha nature, which is a fascicle in Shobogenso. So there's a sentence from the Mahaparinirvana Sutra: all living beings have Buddha nature. And that's a well-known saying. It's widely understood. It's like, you have Buddha nature, I have Buddha nature. Everybody has Buddha nature, and Buddha nature is thought of as this kind of gem inside of us that grows and can manifest. So it's sort of like the opposite of original sin. We have original Buddha nature. Well, so that was an accepted teaching. It's a good teaching. And Dogen turns it into all living beings and entire being are Buddha nature. And then here's the Okumura trick. He says, this kind of interpretation was possible because Dogen was not Chinese. When we study a foreign language, we can read it in ways that differ from those of native speakers. For example, when I was just starting to study English, I visited an American person in his apartment. He said he was going to eat, and I thought, where is he going? And then he just started eating, and I thought, English is a strange language. So, excuse me. So when we read a foreign language, we think in different ways from native speakers. We consider the meaning of the word, and then we try to see the meaning of the whole sentence. And most words have several meanings, so we have to guess which one is appropriate here. So reading in a foreign language is like assembling a jigsaw puzzle. So he thinks this is what Dogen does, is deconstruct the sentence into a collection of words that have many possible meanings, and then he chooses a meaning. So as he says, something very stupid could happen, but also something really brilliant could happen. During the time I studied directly with Okumura, he would explain Dogen's expressions again and again by taking them apart and showing us how Dogen took apart the teachings of his day and turned them into something unique. And so, being in Soto Zen, we actually have a unique understanding that comes from Dogen's idiosyncrasy, perhaps, from Dogen's way of doing this. So then I'm still in his introduction here, and he acknowledged people. And I thought, we live in a community. We are supported. There is no such thing as solo practice. And we have this term for it, interdependent origination. But I just want to read some of this, not all of this, because it's like interdependent origination in action. Well, okay, so Shumucho, the Soto Shu headquarters, sponsored a translation project. Karl Bielefeld worked on the translation, which he used here. And he had first worked on it at Tassajara with Suzuki Roshi. So there we have an organization and a scholar. And then we have San Francisco Zen Center, Blanche Hartman, who is the abbess when he had the first Genzaway, where he taught about mountains and waters. Blanche had been a sewing student of Joshin-san, who was the sewing teacher at Antaiji and who taught the sewing teachers at San Francisco Zen Center. So they're linked. And Blanche allowed him to live at City Center without insisting that he participate in practices, because he was working full-time at Soto Zen Buddhism International Center. He worked there for 12 years, a few of them living there, and then he continued working there while he founded Sanshinji, because Sanshinji didn't have money for him. And so his gift to us was that for 12 years, he had a full-time job and he was our full-time teacher. And when I think about it, eventually the people who do fundraising found enough money so that he could retire from that job and actually be our full-time teacher. The dedication of people who take up teaching while supporting themselves and assisting their students and making things happen is just amazing to me. I'm in that position, but I'm not doing what he's doing. Oh. I also want to say thank you to all the practitioners who participated in the Genzo Way in 2002. Their enthusiasm for studying Dogen was great encouragement for me while I was suffering in the hell of talking about Dharma in English. He said this elsewhere, hell is teaching in English. And he thanks the practitioner at Sanshinji from 2003 till now for their support. Sarah Hunziker transcribed the lectures. I edited them. Molly Whitehead is a professional editor, and she edited them, and then they came back to me. Linda Ruth Cutts gave advice. Isho Fujita, who wrote the foreword to this book, Gary Snyder, gave his essay on mountains and waters and ecology. And his family, and Yuko Okumura. One of the things I learned at the ceremonies was how instrumental both Teijo Munich and Yuko Okumura were in the fact that Shohaku Okumura came to Minnesota and lived with us and taught us for, I think it was actually more than 4 years. It was supposed to be 3 years. But he stayed longer than that. And then he went on to work for Soto Shu. So I'm thinking a lot about Sangha and interdependence. I'm going to jump to some things from Gary Snyder. Why should we cherish all sentient beings? Because sentient beings are the root of the tree of awakening. The bodhisattvas and the Buddhas are the flowers and the fruits. Compassion is the water for the roots. That's the Huayan Sutra, the Flower Ornament Sutra. Yeah. The Mahayana say this was the first thing spoken by the Buddha. And he spoke it to someone who couldn't understand it. And then he backed off and tried a simpler way. So Gary Snyder was living in Kyoto, studying at Daitokuji, was introduced to Dogen by Morimoto Roshi, and who said, Dogen, you should look at Dogen. He gives Zen away. He tells everything. Dogen is like a clam. He opens his mouth and you can see down to the bottom of his stomach. Read the Shobogenso. Now, what interests me is the contrast. Thomas Cleary also says this. He says, Dogen says everything. He doesn't hide anything. My experience from the beginning and still when I read Dogen is that Dogen is difficult. He makes you work. And here are two different esteemed teachers saying, no, he's easy. He just tells you. Of course, he tells you in culturally appropriate language for his time, and we just have to move our minds and adjust ourselves to try to get a sense of it. And so then Snyder says, I knew I was dealing with something far richer than just an East Asian nature sensibility, far more than love of nature with its limited and chosen range of subjects, but with a great mind that played across all the realms. So there's a thing, Dogen once wrote about the water cycle. He didn't call it that. He says, well, the rain falls from the heavens and goes to the ground and it goes to the rivers and it goes to the ocean, then it goes back up into the sky and falls down as rain. People didn't know that then. I never thought about it that he said this, but Okumura Roshi says, no, they didn't know that until much later. This is a modern understanding, and there it is. Dogen sees it and says it. And Snyder says the only way a landscape can be known is by walking across it day after day. I realized that Dogen knew his mountains and rivers, not only from Zazen, but from his own walking, starting with his hike up Mount Hiei when he was 9 or 10. Like everyone in those days, he was doubtless walking hundreds of miles uphill and down in both Japan and China for most of his life. And I read those words and I realized that my walking in 2013, when I walked through the Great Plains, well, I knew it did something to me. But it's like, oh, this is one of my roots, that I spent 90 days walking. I only walked 10 miles a day. We took turns so we could walk the whole trip. But, you know, we were walking through the Great Plains, sometimes desert-like, very dry, cold, hot, raining. And I fell in love with the terrain that I was walking through. So from that time, I have pictures of wheat. I have pictures of wildflowers and wild grasses. I have pictures of cows and birds and clouds. And I have pictures that other people took that are the same thing. If you give it a chance, the landscape speaks to you, and the landscape nourishes you and supports you. And although walking for 3 months, just like going to a monastery and sitting for 3 months, is a treasure, you can also go and walk where you are at any moment. And I am still learning to walk in a way that receives the teaching from the gravel on the road and from the houses and the pavement and the crushed soda cans by the side of the road. This is much harder. And I always tell people, if you're just starting, go look at something that's beautiful, something that just its presence opens you up. Because they do and they will. And then as we work, as in metta meditation, you start sending loving kindness to somebody to whom you're grateful. And then somewhere in there, you send it to somebody who is difficult for you. And at the very end, you send it to somebody who you really don't get, you know, a stranger on the street or something. There's the beginning comes with beauty. And then if we're actually going to deeply hear the Dharma or deeply explore loving kindness, we go to more and more difficult beings. And so one of my practices is to let myself notice receiving. Let myself notice that I'm being created by all beings. Reb Anderson, there's this term wall gazing, referring to Zazen. And once Reb Anderson said, we were doing a morning set, a half-day set, I think. And he said, wall gazing. And then he said, let the wall gaze at you. And so I tried it. I let the wall gaze at me. I let the trees gaze at me. And so there's this in sign language, this is looking, and this is looking at each other. And so sitting and looking and being seen at the same time. I don't know what to say about this practice. It's a practice that creates me. And being created is sort of our practice. It's like we let things create us. We don't imagine that we're the creators. We let ourselves be soft and flexible and be creative again and again and again. So, a little more. Ah, okay. So here's a little from Gary Snyder about ecology. Now, he wrote this a few decades ago. I forgot to check. This book came out, was it 2006? So it's already a while ago. And 2008. Public awareness of the emergency in our relationship with the natural world is much higher than it was then. We are in the age of consequences. But writing quite a bit earlier, Snyder says, the study of ecology is truly the study of shoji, the wheel of life and death, in the realm of desire. But ecologists do not lament it or seek to flee it, but to investigate and analyze it, to hope to know what goes on inside. The ecological view, like the Dharma view, can appreciate the flowers and the moon, but it also sees parasites, bacteria, cancers, and baby birds eaten by snakes with a non-discriminating eye that grasps the many roles in the community of life and death. For some time now, ecological scientists have been telling us all that the way humans and their economies are treating the planet is destructive and dangerous in the extreme. But scientific information in itself does not move governments, world leaders, or masses of people. To transform public policy in regard to the oceans and air, forests, and population questions, and to move towards saving endangered species, both require reaching the very hearts of whole societies. This is not a work for the scientists. Their research is essential to us. But to change the way contemporary human beings live on Earth is a kind of Dharma work, a work for dedicated followers of the way, who, because of their practice and insight, can hope to balance in wisdom and compassion, and help open the eyes of others. In Mountains and Waters Sutra, Dogen says, although mountains belong to the nation, they really belong to the people who love them. And the word love he used there is not one of those sort of fancy words, abstract love. He's talking about the love that people use for their families and their spouses. That kind of love connects us to the mountains. And Snyder says this is weirdly cogent for us as we debate about land use policies with the governments and corporations of the world. In a sense, it can be read as permission to engage with and intervene with the behavior of governments and corporations alike. So, and, okay. And then he suggests that Dogen's nature sensibility can be seen in his poetry, including texts like Sensuikyo, but I had to read this 3 times, his instructional text for forest management, ocean and wetland restoration, and third world crisis intervention would be that guide for Dharma activists and administration, the Tenso Kyokun, the instructions for the cook. I was like, I had to read it 3 times. Wait, Dogen never wrote a thing like that. Oh, okay. The Tenso Kyokun is how we get into movement. And then he says, but I'm speaking as a person from a backward society that is equally far from the land of the Buddha and the land of Plato. So I think I've talked long enough, and I am going to reread Dogen's poem in Snyder's translation. Sounds of stream and shapes of mountains, the sounds never stop and the shapes never cease. Was it Sue who woke, or was it the mountains and streams? Billions of beings see the morning star and all become Buddhas. If you, who are valley streams and looming mountains, can't throw some light on the nature of ridges and rivers, who the hell can? I have no idea what this is, but obviously Snyder took some liberties. But it's like, oh, was it the mountains and streams that woke up? Can we all wake up together? So I invite your questions and thoughts.
Well,
Yes.
You've left us with no questions and probably many thoughts. I want to thank you for very interesting talk, Shodo. And I want to ask you, how is Hoko doing installed now at Sanshin?
Sure, yes. She is installed. I asked her how she felt afterwards, and she said, oh, it's just the same as before because I was already running the place, she said. So now Okumura Roshi felt, what is it? A relief. It's like there's a piece of work that has dropped off his shoulders. And although he promised to give one teaching a year, comparable to the Genzo way, but less strenuous, he really gets to do what he wants now.
All right. Well,
That
well
has to be a
deserved.
wonderful thing for somebody who has worked so hard for so long, for so little.
It's true. It's true.
So, yeah, Hoko she's a planner and an organizer. And she is, so I was on the board until a couple of years, for 3 years, I was on the board. And I watched her, figure things out, wangle funding so that we could do some things. So we had the residential program, 3 people were in it. It's down now, but it's going to come back and it's going to have space for 6 people. I'm glad I'm not the fundraiser. But it was the effect of having residents, even just a few of them, was so huge on the functioning of the whole place. And there's a person who I was closely connected with who was one of those residents, and it transformed him. I mean, it was just like maturing in, he's a key player now. I mean, he was a beginning student and now he's a major person. And I looked at his eyes and I saw it. So she's making things happen. And Sanshinji, as far as I can tell, will be a major Dharma center in the same way that Katagiri is places, and San Francisco Zen Center and Zen Mountain Monastery. And, we know there are these big places, and they cast a net. They have a web, and Sun Shinji is on its way to being one of those. And it's also like in most of the other places, it'll be his successors that make it happen. And Hoko is got the skills and the willingness to do it. We just worry about if she would please take a break sometime. She's one of those works too hard people.
Oh, yeah. We were residents of Kyoji together there for a couple of years. Yeah.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We worked together on all kinds of stuff. And she was born for this, her whole life has prepared her to take that position. And
right. Yeah.
So anyway, nice to hear.
Yeah.
Do we have anybody else have a comment?
I have a comment.
Well, Davey, go ahead.
I really appreciate your talk, Soto. I've spent some time thinking about translations from the standpoint of, for English, is it better to translate this as a noun or a verb? And I've worked with the Wild Fox koan for a few years now. And the turning phrase can be translated as a person of enlightenment doesn't ignore cause and effect. Mm-hmm. But to me, if you translate it as an imperative sentence, don't ignore cause and effect, it seems to have a whole different effect.
How are those two different? Because I would think saying a person of enlightenment would be very much like recommending do this.
Well, it's sort of, but as a declarative sentence, it's sort of a concept. Whereas if he directs it back at the questioner, don't do that, it seems to have a much different effect to me about the koan.
Okay, yeah, I could follow that. I know somebody who did his own translation of the Heart Sutra, and I chanted it some, and anyway, so at some point where it says, "Oh, Shariputra, Dharma, blah, blah, blah," he took out Shariputra and said, "Say your name." And the first time I chanted it with my name in that place, it was like, like fireworks. So that's what you're talking about. Make it alive. Yeah. Thanks. My own one attempt at translation was with the Genjo koan. I think I had a broken foot and access to translation dictionaries. And the Genjo koan can be done so many different ways. And I really had fun, and I made a poem out of it, and then I finally packed it up. And they're much richer than we can imagine, because you have to choose one word to translate a word, or you have to just forget about being a translation and make a three-dimensional thing out of it. Yes.
I really liked your comment on letting the trees see you. I guess from my experience with nature, and usually the way I thought about it is it's something that I experience, or it's like, oh, the fresh air feels good on my nostrils, or, the trees are so pretty to my eyesight. And I appreciate that comment, and it's just something I'm going to kind of think about now whenever I kind of walk around Hokyoji, and I'm going to be like, well, what is it like from the tree's perspective? Or like, what does it mean when the tree sees me versus eye seeing, so I just I appreciate that comment, and it's kind of something to think about. So
thank you for highlighting that. That's actually, it's like, if there was something that was like what my practice is about, that's it. And it may be that little comment of Reb's is what started it. But there's a lot of work by ecologists now about how trees communicate with each other and about how mycelial networks help the trees communicate, and how, the forest is it's seriously a community. And the thing is, before civilization knew this stuff. And some of them still do, even though, they're living in this world. I once met a man who could listen to birds. And he said, they give weather reports. And it's like, oh, you expect something spiritual. But it's like, no, they're giving weather reports so they can get around. And he said more than that, but it's like, oh, yep. Grew up on an island in a traditional culture where everybody knew when the whale was coming long before you could see it with your eyes. He said he'd watch the adult men. They were going this way. And he's like, what are they looking at? And then the whale would appear. And then they would go and hunt it. But yeah, it's sort of new and old reclaiming. And so, most of the people who've lived on this earth have not heard it. Most of them have lived in harmony with it. We're special. So, anyway.
All right. One last chance for additional comments.
Hi, I would just like to say thank you for the talk. It's kind of like jumping into a really cold body of water and getting out afterwards. It's kind of speechless. So I appreciate that. Like Bo, I also appreciate the meeting aspect. Like, there is no I if there is no tree, and they have to co-create. And also that the buying and selling in the marketplace is the same. I really appreciate that. Coming out of Sesshin at Hokyoji and having to do like shopping on a Monday after Sesshin, you can really feel that. You can just sharing a smile with someone in an aisle in Walmart or something, or seeing that piece of trash. Like, it's very much that is right there. So yeah, thanks for the talk.
Yeah, you're welcome. And thanks for saying that. I saw that people were paying close attention, so I wasn't too worried about the shortage of questions. But yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for listening. You made it happen.
All right. Well, I guess we got a couple of announcements. Ryushin, Jen Fryer, will be giving the Dharma talk next week. At least your name is on the schedule, Jen. So we will tune in for that. It's a holiday weekend here, kind of. Got to hang out at the lake with my granddaughters yesterday, and they can perceive the Dharma directly. When toddlers, it's like there is no filter there. So anyway, it's very nice. Thank you once again, Shodo, for your very interesting talk. And let's close with the 4 vows now. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. The illusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Have a great day.